Picture this, 1983, a SoCal boy wanders to his neighbor's house. A boy who's 11 years old, 5 years older than him, has an Atari 2600. He just got a new game, and this time he lets him play it. And honestly, it was kind of a magical moment. It's the first video game I ever played, and I remember it so well, the music and everything that went with it. This one was made by Data East, 1982, brought to the United States by Mattel Electronics for the Intellivision, but it was compatible with the Atari 2600. I just had to have this one, and I found one sealed over on Dibdit.com and bought it at a super good deal, and I will have it in my 80s cave soon. And in comparison to today's day and age, this is nothing amazing, but just the sounds, listen to that. I remember it so well, and I spent hours over there that day. In this video, we are going to talk about the top 10 most valuable games that are compatible with the Atari 2600 video gaming system. Now, we're going to do far more than that, actually, because if you're like me and you're a treasure hunter out there, you want to be able to find not just those holy grails that are almost impossible to find when you spot them. You want to be able to find a bunch of stuff if you're a collector or if you're a reseller or if you're a bit of both to add to your collection or to make a few bucks, to make some money, to add the game that you do want to add to your collection. But before we talk about value, before we talk about rarity, collectability, we got to go back to that time when video games were new. They were mysterious, and they were honestly a bit magical to most of us who are around my age. It was the early 1970s, long before video gaming was an industry at all, and Atari was born in Sunnyvale, California. Was founded by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. They weren't setting out to change the world, although you could argue that they really did. They were really setting out to create something fun and profitable. When they created the simple game of Pong, they did exactly that. People were lining up in bars, arcades, dropping quarters into machines, and it just seemed like the future was upon us. At the time, Atari was stacked with brilliant young minds, dreamers, engineers. Two of them happened to be named Steve. One of them wore shoes, one of them didn't. And one of those Steves got put on the night shift because a lot of people couldn't handle him. They developed Breakout, and it was Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak that created that game for Atari and cemented their relationship that very soon after turned into Apple. And in 1977, best year ever, unless you were Elvis, Atari brought the arcade game into your home. The Atari 2600 in all of its wood grain glory with its chunky joysticks just didn't sit in your home. It made a home of its own there. Compared to earlier game systems like the Magnavox Odyssey, which I have bought and sold a few times, this thing seemed limitless. You could just exchange cartridges, explore new worlds, and just have an amazing time as a kid. But that rush to become bigger and better, faster, and to be everywhere all at one time came at a cost. In 1982, Atari released Pac-Man for the 2600. It sold millions of copies, y'all, but many players remember the disappointment of the flickering ghosts and all the missing colors. Then came E.T. the Extraterrestrial, a game rushed out in just weeks, and I mean rushed out. Development, production, shipping, the whole 9 yards, became infamous almost overnight. It wasn't just a bad game, it was a terrible game. It became a symbol of an industry that grew too fast and stumbled really hard. So as Atari starts to struggle a little bit, its own creators formed its own competition, and some of them left because they weren't getting compensated enough, they weren't being paid enough, and they started Activision. You're going to see later competition for consoles, and then some lawsuits as well for compatibility. Can you make a game for this company that works with this company's device? And it's an interesting read, and I've kind of had quite a bit of fun looking into it. However, that's not the focus of this video, but it will give you a little bit of context that will help you when you're out there trying to find those rare gems at garage sales. So ColecoVision comes along. You remember Sears starts to sell their console as well in their department stores, and it is a Wild West free-for-all, and that sets up for some pretty rare games that you might be able to find out there, and then quite a few less rare games that you will definitely be able to find out there at garage sales. I remember going to garage sales 25 years ago at this point, and I would come back every single time I went out with video game systems. A lot of times 2 or 3 different Atari systems, and we could make good money. I wish I had a few of those really rare games back now that I sold off way cheaper then. There was a series of sales of bits and pieces of some of these companies. Even Bushnell himself sold off a part of it. His original partner had sold off a part of it as well. And Bushnell eventually leaves and, strangely enough, creates another iconic brand, Chuck E. Cheese. So these cartridges and the ones like them, the ones that we traded, we lost, we rediscovered, we played until they fell apart, those things kind of become time capsules. And there's a lot of value in some of them, depending on condition and depending on how many were made. And that is what we're going to look at today. And we're going to look at 10 different tiers of video games for the 2600 that you can find serious value in. And then at the end, we're going to get to the actual top 10 list and give you the 10 most valuable games. It'll be disputed. Just remember, I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I love to be dangerous when I'm out there hunting for stuff for myself, or if I'm out there looking to pass things on to collectors. So we're going to have a mix of tiers and games and then conclude it with nothing but the absolutely ridiculous priced top 10 games of all time. Number 10 category is something I'm sliding in right here because it's not exactly a game, but there are a bunch of these out there and you may come across one. It is the color bar generator, and it's not technically a game, but it'll fit into an Atari 2600 for sure. It was actually designed in order for TV repairmen to use it as a diagnostic tool when they're out there on the field. Number 9, I kind of want to look at the Atari branded games. A lot of the ones that you'll find in these upper tiers and the top 10 most valuable ones are not Atari branded. The reason that is because the Atari branded ones got major production and they were selling millions of copies in their height of their years. I think 81 and 82 were the very high part. I'll put a couple of different charts on here to give you an idea of the rise and fall of Atari. And then, of course, Atari comes back later on with 2 different consoles, and then the Jaguar a little bit later. Now, when I'm out there hunting around, treasure hunting for games, the Atari branded ones, like you said, you see them all the time. They're very hard to sell, not for a ton of value, unless, of course, they are brand new and sealed in the package. Then you can get a little bit of money for them. But there are certain names that you guys will recognize, and they are worth picking up and selling in lots, and condition and cover art is still a big deal. And you're going to recognize a lot of these names: Combat, Adventure, Asteroid, Centipede, Missile Command, Space Invaders, Breakout, Yar's Revenge, Pac-Man, of course, Super Breakout, and the E.T. game. And, of course, legendarily, these were way overproduced, especially the E.T. game, because of the failure of the Pac-Man game, which was also way overproduced. And these things supposedly ended up in landfills in New Mexico, I believe. And I think that was proven about a decade ago. And some of these were released with 2 different titles because Atari did a deal with Sears as well. So there's a partnership. Many games were released under both the Atari and Sears Telegames brands, sometimes with different names. Air Sea Battle versus Target Fun, for instance. And so, while not worth a ton of money, just for nostalgia's sake, I still pick these up. And like I said, bundling together with some of these not very rare titles, you can make a little bit of money. All right, number 8. And this comes about because, well, Atari's going to lose a lawsuit with Activision, and there was already just a flooding. Remember, this was the Wild West, and people were making cartridges that would fit and work in the Atari 2600, but they weren't doing it with permission. And Atari loses this lawsuit, and it's just the Wild West. And you're going to have some very low-produced games by other companies. This tier is about the major companies that were producing games that would work with that system. A lot of them had their own systems as well, or they would work with some of the off-brand systems. And everything was just absolute chaos for a brief moment in time, but it was an incredible amount of creativity going on. Let me read you some of these other companies and show you some of the games that will come in this tier. Some of these games you will see reappear in the absolute top 10 list at the end. iMagic, Activision, Parker Brothers even, Mattel, which we just talked about right there, Coleco. I think Bally, Midway, they would do a lot of the production for the actual arcade games, but I think they got in this as well. Wizard, Tiger Electronics, if you remember that, 20th Century Fox even, and I've hopefully been scrolling and putting some comps that fit these categories right here that aren't necessarily at the very top of the list. Number 7, I'm going to make, this is kind of a combo tier right here, and you can find these games. This is going to be called the loose games that you can find out there. Some of them are fairly easy to find and have low value unless the cover art and the cartridge are in perfect condition. A lot of them, well, 3 of them I can think of off the top of my head here are Nintendo games branded for this system, for the Atari 2600, that are compatible. And of course, Mario Brothers, and people are still out there wanting to buy those. And you also have Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. If you find them in immaculate condition, they're probably worth picking up, and you can find them fairly often. I think on the higher end of ones you can find, a lot of times you're finding some that are produced in 1984 and maybe even be secondary versions. I can think of Pitfall 2, for instance, that goes for decent money, and there's some out there and you can find it. I have found one, however, in 25 years. Number 6, and honestly, this tier, you will see a lot of these type of games that will end up in our top 10 absolute most valuable games, but we're going to make it its own tier here, because if you're out there hunting at garage sales and you see one with a T handle, you should pick it up. Part of the reason this is worth so much, these are worth so much, is because Atari first started producing these in the late 70s. Here's a few reasons why they did it with a T handle. Ease of removal. Early cartridges fit very tightly. The handle made them easy to pull out. Retail durability. The handle reduced wear on the label and the shell in stores and in homes, but they abandoned this. So these are very low production, and it takes place before you see the massive spike in production, and it makes sense because it's going to cost more to manufacture these. The packaging is bulkier, and so they abandon it pretty quickly, which gives a lot of these quite a bit of value. I'm going to read off some Atari titles, and later on you're going to see some other titles come in that aren't made by Atari but are compatible. And again, you may see some of these exact same titles when we get to the absolute top 10 here. Combat, Air Sea Battle, these all look like they're 78, 77, 78. Indy 500, Starship, Street Racer, Surround, Video Olympics, Pong Sports, Basic Math, Codebreaker, and Human Cannonball. There are other titles, if you look on eBay right now, that are listed, and you will see a few sold comps with T handles. I'm just looking at a few here. Spider Monster, Condor Attack, Vulture Attack, and Spider Maze, all not made by Atari but are compatible. Before we hit number 5, I want to invite you over to dibdit.com. It is a wonderful place for collectors, whether you're a buyer, you're a seller, if you just want to hang out. It is where I got this burger time from an awesome seller over there, and it is actually my site, if you are not aware of that. And we're approaching 20,000 members, and it has been a great time, great safe place to buy and sell. Come check us out, dibdit.com. Number 5, and we're going to call this one the promo category. We're also going to throw a little bit of a theme, a Christian theme in there, because you started to see there's 2 things here. The first one is Atari loses a lawsuit, of course, and you're not going to be able to stop people from producing game cartridges that work in other systems. And that opens up the floodgates for big companies to come in and do promotions. And you're going to see some of these titles again, so I won't mention them all here because some of these are actually going to go in the ultimate top 10 list. But number 5 here, we're going to look at some of these promos. And for an Atari collector, these are hard to come by, and especially if you get an Atari collector or a collector of this era of games, they want everything, and some of them are hard to find. So these are typically mail-away offers, contests, regional exclusives, corporate promotions, not regular retail items, but I have known people who have found a couple different ones of these titles, one that found one that you'll find in the top 10, but here's the list. Kool-Aid Man, mail-in with the drink mix, proof of purchase. Basic Programming, 1979 by Atari itself, educational programming cartridge. Music Machine, which is a Christian themed, and there's a bunch of different Christian themed ones out there that religious folks can create on their own and try to get those out there. Remember the danger of video gaming and all the stuff that you saw back then. So there was a big push for Christian themed games for sure. There's even one from Johnson & Johnson in 1983. for toothbrushes, tooth protector. Number 4 is, it kind of goes without saying, but if you can find just about any game new sealed in the package, it's going to be worth some money, even if it's a very highly produced, even if it's like E.T. or Pac-Man. Just the fact that it's new and sealed, it goes without saying. But complete in box as well, and you'll multiply the value of an item if it has the box and the paperwork, and condition, of course, matters. We've thrown a few on the screen here that might not be highly valuable as a cartridge alone, but if you're finding anything sealed, you should pick it up. And then we get into the grading factor. This game right here, this is an interesting one. This game is not worth very much. It was very highly produced. It's right in that era of high production, right towards the tail end of it. And this one happens to be sealed, which is going to increase the value. And then you got to start looking at grading. See how there's a crease on the side of that one. I'm not going to get into that today, but that should be obvious that if you're finding things out there complete in box sealed, you should pick them up. Number 3 on the list is something that should be on almost every list with whatever we're talking about collectible, and that's the crossover list. And you're going to have movies and pop culture and TV and music that are going to have Atari compatible games, and those usually bring decent value, except for the exceptions like E.T., of course, because it was so overly produced. But it's because people who like to collect, say, Strawberry Shortcake, for instance, some of them don't even realize there's an Atari game, and if they realized it, they would want it, and it pushes up the value. I can't remember all these, so I'm going to give you just quick little snippets from each category. So if we're talking about movies here, of course, E.T., Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars Return of the Jedi, Death Star Battle. That reminds me that there's also a very rare promo edition of the Ewoks from Return of the Jedi that they never released. And I don't know if that's findable or not, but if it is, it's probably worth a fortune. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Superman, Grease, The Towering Inferno, Fatal Run, which was a Mad Max-style post-apocalypse aesthetic. There were even TV show video games, MASH. Honestly, the playability of these isn't as significant to that type of collector as the artwork is, because 99% of the time, it's just going to be on display. Don't forget the comic book crossovers, even before some of the major motion pictures were made. Spider-Man, Superman, the big titles, of course. And some other pop culture tie-ins here in music. Journey Escape has an Atari-compatible game. Chuck Norris, I mentioned Strawberry Shortcake, but even Snoopy and the Smurfs have a game that is compatible with the 2600. On to number 2, and if you're out there and you find a title and you look it up and you can't find any information on it, that might be a great sign. You might have found a homebrew game. Comes from the word, obviously, people would make their own beer at home. Well, it's the same idea, where independent folks are out there creating their own games that are compatible with the 2600. This starts in the 70s. Starts to really ramp up after the big collapse in, say, 1984, has a resurgence in the 90s, and people are still making games today independently that are compatible with the 2600, and some of them can have some significant value. And here's a little tidbit as well. Depending on who creates it, even if it was very low run and that person goes on to become somebody big in this industry or another industry, they're going to have more value because of the creator of that particular game. So if you have a game, do a little research, find who the creator is before you post it, or if you keep it in your own collection. 1980s Escape from Mindmaster, Stephen Hales. Communist Mutants from Space, 1982. Sounds like a 1982 title. Some other 80s titles, Gas Hog, Solar Storm, Mangea, and Rabbit Transit. I'll throw in some titles from the 90s as well. This is the true homebrew resurrection, 1995. Chris Spry, Ack, one of the first modern era homebrew releases. Pesco, Thrust, that's 1999. Oistron, I've never heard of that. And Aardvark from Ron Weiss. 2000s, Golden Age of Homebrew. Medieval Mayhem, 2002. Space Rocks. Halo 2600 was produced in 2010. Princess Rescue, 2013. Stay Frosty, 2014. Zippy the Porcupine, 2018. Draconian, 2017. So you can see there is a long tradition of these, and they cannot be highly produced, and there should be some collectability out there. And in this homebrew section, we're also going to put some here that you're going to see in the top 10 here we're going to hit next. And these are going to be adult-themed, kind of adult entertainment games out there. And I know multiple people who have found some of these because some of them were highly produced. Not in the Atari sense of producing millions, but you can find them out there. Custard's Revenge, 1982. Interesting cover art on that one. Bachelor Party. That one says it's an adult reinterpretation of Breakout. My gosh, I can't even read this one. Gigolo. And those are some of the early ones. So the home brewing continues, and you'll see modern incarnations. Burning Desire, Lady in Waiting. And so you're going to see these go on. So if you find the adult ones, I'm not saying play them, but they might be worth a little bit of money. Side note, if you see Mystique written on any of them, I believe it's a Swedish company. Those are the ones usually that have the high value. All right, number one, and we're going to do something a little weird because I want these to be educational and for people to really be able to use them and to get them in their memory bank so they can find them out there for their own collections or to resell. So we're going to look at the Holy Grails right here. And a lot of these will be repeats. Some of these will be repeats of some of the ones we've already talked about in the different categories. But I've actually divided this up and did a little research for what are the most valuable, the absolute Holy Grails. What are the ones that have sold, actual sold comps in the last, say, year, and they're provable. And then some of the ones of the most valuable that you can actually find out there. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to read through them very quickly and put some sold comps on the screen. The first list that I made out here is kind of things that you will actually be able to find. They might not be easy to find, don't get me wrong, but you should be able to find, if you're out there hunting all the time and know where to look, you might find one of these one day. Condor Attack, that's one of the T-handle games, and the values are going to be just completely ranging here. If I can find a comp, I'll put it on the screen. Sometimes the comps are hard to find because the last sale hasn't happened for years. But these things could be, I'll just basically say hundreds to thousands of dollars based on what the condition is, if it's complete in box or if it's new and sealed even. So Condor Attack, ones you might be able to find, number 10. We've got Tooth Protectors, which I mentioned earlier out there. This was an office giveaway and sometimes untouched. So it's not unlikely that you might find one of these completely sealed. And it might be worth upwards of, a couple $100 sealed to maybe even $800-900 out there. Karate, I think this came in 2 versions. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there's a T handle on this one. Could be worth hundreds, upwards of many hundreds of dollars as well. Berenstein Bears Kid Vid Talking Video Game Set. Kids title. Saved by parents, often pristine and never used because they'd get that somehow in a promo. And they didn't have the system to sell it. But again, hundreds to many hundreds of dollars for that one. X-Man, very different, X-Man. This was often mistaken, just like I did for the superhero games, but it's not. It is absolutely adult content, and you can find these out there. I've never found one, but they can sell upwards of $100 to thousands of dollars. Number 5, Sword Quest Waterworld, a later release. Very few were put out of this, but we're talking hundreds to thousands for this one. So here's one of those promos, Chuckwagon video game. Chase the Chuckwagon. Again, it could be, if it's separate, if it's loose, maybe not in great condition, it may not have tremendous value, but if you can find them in better condition and sealed, they can run upwards, depending on the era of when you're selling it and what condition it is in, maybe even $1,000. Quadrin, and this again was a mail-away Atari title, which is going to mean it's very low production, much like the LJN figures and the Sergeant Slaughter figure that comes out that's really not made by LJN, but you get the point. This one could be worth hundreds to thousands as well. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Definitely a high on people's lists, and I do see sold comps from this from time to time. There's probably some I'm putting on the screen right now. I would love to find this one. Has that crossover. It's also not going to be made by Atari. It's sold in novelty shops, sometimes mixed in with normal games. Of course, I think it's slightly later released than the height of the market. Red Label cards deserve a second look, they say on this one. So hundreds to thousands on that one. Another crossover non-Atari release along that same genre is Halloween. Sold through mail order, not retail. So that's going to increase the value because of the rarity and the crossover effect of these. hundreds to many thousands of dollars if you find the perfect one sealed in great shape, maybe even throw in a grade. So that was top 10 of things you actually can find out there. I made another list of top 10 with actual sold comps on eBay in the last year. Chase the Chuckwagon, we've already mentioned it. Quadrum, we've already mentioned it. Gamma Attack, and that one is a modern homebrew. I don't think we mentioned it, maybe just briefly, but a sold comp upwards of $2,000 in the last year. Must have been a sealed one. I don't know if I can find that picture or not. Halloween, we've already mentioned, but there are actual sold comps in the hundreds. And over the last year, I think over 1,000 a couple times. The Star Wars Ewok Adventure has a sold comp, and we're looking at between $1,200 and $1,700. Atlantis 2, which we mentioned previously in here as well, loose are selling for crazy money with actual sold comps. I don't think River Patrol is one we have mentioned, but that one you can find sold comps for with significant value. Pepsi Invaders is one out there you should be looking for. Air Raid, probably one of the most collectible games that people want to find. $9,000 sold comp. I don't know if that one was on eBay. It may have been somewhere else, but Air Raid is definitely one you want to find. If you can find it sealed in a box, you have big bucks, tens of thousands of dollars. And going back to that Christian genre we talked about before, Red Sea Crossing comes in here on this list with actual sold comps in the last year, and obviously condition really makes a difference here, but we could be talking about thousands of dollars for Red Sea Crossing as well. Even with no box, this thing goes for big bucks. I had another one on my list. Matter of fact, a couple of them. Cakewalk, you know, these are kind of hard for somebody who's not a collector to really talk about, but this one I had on the list and wanted to mention it. I am no expert, but this one seems to be the grail of grails, only maybe a dozen in some of my research that I've heard about being made, and there are sold years and years ago, and so I think it's an interesting one. Maybe some of you collectors can tell us a little bit more about it, and I just wanted to make sure we mentioned it. So there you go. Hopefully you collectors enjoyed this, and I didn't screw it up too bad out there. I'm just trying to learn and hopefully find some of this stuff at garage sales and keep some of it like I do with this one for my 80s cave and post some of it up for sale. This is the kind of stuff that you can look for and hunt for. Maybe even come over to dibdit.com and you can start a collection if you're not a collector at this point. But thank y'all for stopping by. Forgive my mistakes. I'm sure there are many in here, but I had a fun time learning. I hope you did too. Don't forget, dibdit.com. Give us a subscribe if you don't mind. We appreciate you stopping by, and I can't wait to see you next time.